Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the SPARS Report Committee User Group meeting. I'm happy you all can join us today. For those who don't know me, I'm Natalie Arnold. I'm the Reports Committee Chair, and I am from the Orner County Library. I'm the Assistant Director. Just a little about me. Some of my main roles that I do here at the library is pretty much head of technology, cataloging, and acquisitions. Which means I'm also responsible for statistical data collection and reporting here at my library. So I'm in the Spark reports fairly often. And I'm very thankful for all the shared reports that we have, since I myself, even though I'm the reports chair, find creating reports somewhat difficult. So they are always very helpful. And the reports are an essential tool that we need for data collecting, whether it's for reporting to our board, our township officials, or just the annual state report as well. The other aspect of data collection is understanding the data, how to interpret what it's telling us, which I think is a good segue to introduce our two special guests that we have today who will be presenting on data literacy. So I am happy to welcome Kate Cummings, who's the Research and Instruction Librarian and Assistant Professor at the Weinberg Memorial Library at the University of Scranton, and Sylvia Orner, Assistant Professor and Collections and Resource Management Librarian at Weinberg Memorial Library at the University of Scranton. So I wanted to thank you two for joining us today, and I'm very excited about your presentation. So I will unshare my screen now. I'll stop sharing, and you guys can take it away.
All right, great. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen now. And let's see. It's always exciting to see when you have like multiple monitors going on where things show up. So can everyone see?
Yep.
Data literacy and data storytelling? Great.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to be here today to talk about a few things that are very near and dear to my heart: data literacy and data storytelling. As Natalie mentioned, I'm Sylvia Orner. I'm the Collection and Resource Management Librarian here at the University of Scranton. And here with me today is Kate Cummings. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself really quickly.
Kate Cummings, Research and Instruction Librarian for Business specifically, here at the University of Scranton.
And so today we'd like to talk a little bit about data literacy and data storytelling. I'm sure you all know, being folks who work with reports a lot, that we as librarians collect vast amounts of data, whether it's, circulation data or that annual report data or assessment data. And sometimes I think it's a little bit difficult to know, what does this all mean? What do I do with it? So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means to be data literate, to know your data, to know how to use it, and how to share it with other people in a meaningful way. And then Kate's going to talk a little more about how you take that to the next step. How do you use your data to tell stories? So let's get started. Before I get too into it, maybe some of you have heard the term data literacy before. Maybe some of you even consider yourselves to be data literate already. And if so, that's great. But for those of you who might not be sure, so data literacy is essentially the ability to work with data, to communicate with data, and read data. And as we move towards an increasingly data-driven world, the ability to leverage these skills becomes increasingly important. So to explain a little bit more about that, what that really means, I'm going to take a closer look at each of these pieces. So working with data, that effectively means, are you able to assess and understand data sources and collection methods? Do you know, where is your data coming from? Is the source a good source? Is it a reliable source? Is there enough diversity in your data set to make meaningful conclusions or predictions, if that's what you're trying to do? we want to make sure that we're using reliable data and that that data is representative. We also want to make sure that we're applying data, correctly by understanding when and how to use the numbers we've gathered. And knowing your data goes a long way towards ensuring that you're using it appropriately. And I will probably say this 100 times during the presentation, but if you remember nothing else, I hope you remember that context is key. And one of the things at every step of the data literacy process is understanding your data in context. So as a little bit of an example, I hope you're all ready for the audience participation portion of this program. I'd like you to consider a scenario. So let's say we are using our data to assess if a program is successful. Let's say we have a Friday morning story time event and we're trying to figure out how the program is doing. So to do that, we collected some data from June to December and we put it in our nice little graph, and oh no, it looks like, our story time has decreased in popularity over time. That's terrible news. Maybe we should discontinue it, or maybe we should move it to a separate time. But before we go any further, what do you think about this assessment based on the data we've gathered? Is there something missing? Are there other factors that we might want to consider? So I'd be interested if you want to either put it in chat or unmute. What do you think about this data assessment?
It doesn't say how often you have the story time.
Right. So we don't know how often story time occurred. Did it occur did it occur the same number of times every month? Were there some months, maybe in December, because there were holidays or inclement weather, maybe you had fewer story times? Anything else? Oh, I just realized I can't actually see chat. Yeah, Natalie also said number of programs offered each month. And Terry said, that's a good point too. What age group? If it's school aged, it would naturally go down in the fall. So yes, absolutely. Joshua pointed out, what are the programs? What was the weather? How often was it advertised? All good factors to consider. And Barb, again, when was the story time? If it was during school hours, they're probably losing a lot of folks during the school year. Right? These are all really good things to consider when you're making an assessment. And a lot of you mentioned things that are not only quantitative, meaning you can count them, but are also qualitative. Like, what was the weather like? Do we have school age kids? Things like that. And Elizabeth said, oh yeah, this one is big for me. This is my pet peeve when it's not done consistently. What are you counting? Just kids, adults and kids, families as a whole? So yeah, you want to make sure that you're consistently counting that number from time to time. So if you had one story time and someone's counting 5 kids there, and then the next story time someone is counting 5 kids plus 10 adults plus, whoever else decided to show up, someone who just, walked through the room to go to the bathroom, it's not really as accurate a representation. So yeah, and I think this is a good illustration of how a lot more goes into assessment than just numbers, but your data can be a really good start. So once we understand more about where our data is coming from and what it represents and what the context is, then we can start thinking about the next step, which is reading our data. And essentially what reading data is the ability to critically interpret data and visualizations. It's understanding what your data represents, and it's drawing relevant conclusions based on that data. And I think we saw a little bit in that last scenario why that's so important. You know, it keeps us from making hasty conclusions. It keeps us from making false assumptions. And this kind of critical thinking can also help us better communicate data when the time comes. So I'd like to take a look at another scenario where the ability to read data might also come in handy. So this is very cool. Let's say we're working on some collection development stuff and we want to know, oh, I wonder who our most popular authors are. So this was, I didn't attribute it appropriately on my slide, I'm sorry. This is taken from the Seattle Public Library. They do some really neat stuff out on Tableau Public. I don't know if any of you are using Tableau Public, but it's totally free, even if you just want to look. So if you're ever interested in checking out some of the things that they've done in the past, I highly recommend it. They do some really neat stuff. So one of the things that they do that you'll see in this illustration here is they do a release of the year's top circulating authors, both in print and electronic format. And I see I accidentally cut off the top of the chart, but what the blue represents is print materials. So these are their top circulating authors in print. And at the bottom, we have the top circulating authors in electronic resources. And if we're considering for collection development purposes, you know, what kind of conclusions can we make from this chart? Is there anything that makes you want to know more or makes you want to, you know, ask additional questions? What do we think? And again, now that I know how to look at chat, I'll look at chat, and also if anyone wants to unmute. Yeah, Barb makes a good point. It's a nice list of names, but it doesn't say much. I would like to know more, like the total numbers behind the circulation, and also how does that compare with total overall circulation? Like, this jumped out to me right away. I don't know if anyone else noticed it, but exactly what Kate said. If you look at the print list, it seems to be predominantly children's authors, which I thought was very interesting, and which is why I would want to know. And Elizabeth is a former children's librarian, pointed out that children's titles tend to be repeat checkouts and renewals. So yeah, I don't know about you, but one thing this makes me more curious about is how does this compare to our overall total circulation for the year? Do we circulate more children's books than adult books? Like, does this data match up? And Kim said, yeah, more copies per author in children's.
And I'm also curious about like the time of year, like specifically like Dr. Seuss. It's like, was it during like Dr.
Oh,
Seuss Day? And like some of these titles, like it could have been like summer reading that they were checking out.
good point.
Yeah, I was just, yeah, it doesn't really say much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be interesting too. If they broke this down even further by month, I wonder how it would look, if it would change at all, if we would notice more of a pattern, or if, you know, there might be authors showing up here that don't show up in the overall. I love this. These are all really good insights and really great questions to ask. And I love that in reading your data, it gets you more curious. And I think that that's one of the really nice things about us being information professionals. We're all naturally curious. So effectively reading your data is going to help kind of foster that natural curiosity. And you're going to learn like so much more about your collections or your programs or your community. Although I will say, because I've done this before, you have to be very careful, or else you may spend a large amount of your time like looking at things in your data. So be prepared to go down some rabbit holes. So once we start reading our data and really thinking about like what it means and what it's saying, next, we want to start communicating with it, right? So now it's time to give our data to the world. We know how to explore it. We know how to interpret it. So the next logical step is sharing it, right? And I would argue that this is probably the hardest part in all of data literacy, is effectively communicating with data. And what it means essentially is that we can craft meaningful visualizations, meaningful communications that are accessible to our audience, and we can present the data in the proper context to avoid misleading statements and assumptions. And for this part of the process, it is so important that you really know your data, but also that you really know your audience. How can you put something in a context that they will understand? Like, I know my big pet peeve is when people just throw big numbers out at me. It's like, well, we have over 9,000 circulations. And it's like, that's good, but what does that mean? Why should I care? You know, and again, this is one of the hardest pieces, and also one where I think you really need a little help. So I would encourage people, as they're preparing to communicate with their data, to work with other folks, either at your library or sometimes even outside your library. Run things by them, like, does this make sense? You know, is this something that my board is going to get? Like, I know what it means to me, but how do I make it mean the same thing to them? And I know this, Kate will get a little bit into this with the data storytelling, but we always want to get some outside eyes on these kinds of things to make sure we're not being biased or confusing. So I'm going to do my last scenario for you. And this one is very personal. This is a very bad piece of data communication that I personally prepared, just so that you know, this is a learning process. And even if this is something that you do every day, it always helps to have someone, you know, kind of looking over your shoulder. So to give you some context, last semester, I was doing research on how many open access publications our faculty members were publishing. And I was really excited when I found that the number was increasing over time, especially in the past 5 or 6 years. So I really quick made this chart to show off my findings. And I was like really excited about showing it to people. And I showed my husband, who gets to see a lot of like my library related stuff. He's very knowledgeable about it by process of osmosis. And I mean, can you guess what he had to say about it?
It looks to me that the years are in the wrong order, so it appears that it's gone down instead of up.
It does. It does. So he came back to me and he was like, I don't know what you're saying. This is a really bad decrease, not an increase. I'm like, no, you're reading it wrong. You have to read it from this way to that way, like a manga. In my defense, I was reading an awful lot of manga at the time. So, but because he pointed that out to me, you know, I was able to fix it and make something that was a little more reflective of what my results are. So I think that kind of covers our basic data literacy points. Your data is a really powerful tool if you leverage it properly. And it's not a thing, I think, that, you know, we can do alone, which is why I'm always like really happy that we have groups like this who are meeting and discussing data and what to do with their data and reporting on the data. So that is really exciting to me. So since we're all librarians, and I know we love a good story, the next logical step once you have mastered your data literacy is how can I leverage this into a good story? How can I tell something with numbers just as good as any book? So now that we've covered our bases with basic data literacy, Kate's going to give you an overview on using your data to tell your story. So I'm going
All
to
right.
give it over to Kate.
So yeah, so I'm going to go over what data storytelling is. So basically, it goes beyond simply presenting your numbers and charts, right? It leverages the power of a narrative to weave this data into a story, revealing unexpected patterns or driving home key insights. It also humanizes the data and makes it more relatable and memorable, which is really what you want. You want people to remember things when you, at the end of the day, whomever you're presenting this data to. For instance, Sylvia was talking about context, and we have this nice little chart here of the population of bears. It's a good chart. We can clearly see that the population of bears has increased over time, but it has no context. So it leaves us wondering a lot of things. And a story about it, a story surrounding it, would help us with that context. All right, Sylvia, you can go to the next slide. There we go. So why data storytelling matters for librarians? Well, we all understand the power of a story, but it's good for our stakeholders as well as for our patrons. So for stakeholders, it can engage them in a diverse audience in new ways. It can make information more accessible and understandable when you weave it into a narrative. We all function day to day in and out of stories. And it highlights the value of libraries to these stakeholders. For patrons, if we're thinking about working with patrons with data, which may be something you have or haven't thought about, you can create really interactive and dynamic learning experiences, and that also supports critical thinking and information literacy skills. All right. So building your data story. This is when you're kind of looking at your data and how you're going to move forward with it. So it requires careful planning. And Sylvia mentioned audience, and taking in consideration your audience and the message you're trying to convey is hugely important. You have to make sure you understand the data yourself to be able to convey it really well. Then you have to select data that actually supports your message. And sometimes what we do is we collect a bunch of data and then thinking it will tell us one thing and realizing that it's not actually answering the questions we hoped it would answer in the first place. And sometimes that's why thinking about the messaging in the first place can actually help you find the right data, if that makes sense. Sometimes we do it backwards. After you uncover these insights while you're looking at your data, create those impactful visuals. They don't have to be fancy, but they need to be clear, they need to be readable, they need to be understandable. And at the end of the day, practice your story. Know it inside and out, because that's what makes it a meaningful experience for those that you're interacting with. All right. Okay, so this is the story wheel, and it's from The Power of Data Storytelling. It's a book. And this is a way you can break down a story into different narrative parts. So for instance, the who of a story, you're identifying your characters. The what is the purpose of your story. The when and where would be understanding your data. The why and how is assessing the events that happened around that data. That's some of that context. What next are any outcomes or conclusions you made from that. And then there's always a so what, the aha moment that hopefully brings everything together, or is a special thing that you noticed or something like that to draw in your audience. And I have an example of this on the next slide. Okay, so say you were using circulation data to help improve your reader's advisory, to see what was and wasn't circulating. And in this scenario, your patrons are the who. Those are the people that you're trying to interact with. And the what, the purpose of looking at this circulation data is to improve the reader's advisory or programming, that sort of thing. The when and where, again, this is the data you're actually looking at. So we're looking at circulation data, So particularly, you're interested in titles that aren't really circulating. Why aren't they circulating? And you're aligning that with things that are maybe critically acclaimed or they're award winners, things like that. So why are these low circulating items that are also critically acclaimed not going out? What is going on? Then when you look at the why and how, or interpreting that data, are there any trends that you're seeing? Is there happen to be something with like, are these items in a particular location? Are they, is there something about their content that is similar? Like what's going on? And then what next is those outcomes and conclusions. And I called this one highlighting hidden gems, because maybe what you noticed is that a lot of the lower circulating items happen to be diverse in nature. So they're not necessarily sought out, but if you create a display around those, you may then be exposing your community to titles that they may not have sought out, but are, you know, these award-winning, wonderful books. So that so what moment is that you're exposing these diverse titles to your community. All right. I hope that makes sense to everyone. Yeah, so you're just basically breaking these down into the different types of story points if you think about crafting a story. All right. So data visualization tips. So, and Sylvia touched on this a little bit, but try to use visuals that align with your data and message. Keep it simple and easy to understand, right? People really got big on the infographics and they started getting real crazy with them a handful of years ago. They got real wild and it wasn't always positive, right? So label your axes and data points clearly. Consider your audience's prior knowledge. That's important. If they don't necessarily have the prior knowledge to be able to read the charts or graphs, make sure you have that context for them within the story itself. And then use color and design effectively. And now we have a couple of examples of data visualization don'ts. So this is a lovely chart. It's a bunch of countries, and I don't know what they're measuring because the title says population by country and country, whatever that means. So this chart is clearly useless, right? It's way too much happening. The labels are bad. There's just way too much going on. So then you have to remember correlation and causation, right? So right here we see an increase in murders go up from May to June and an increase in ice cream sold. Now, obviously, these two things seem correlated in this graph, but one does not cause the other, right? So it's weird that they're both on the same graph, right? Then we have misrepresentation and distortion. So on the first set of graphs, you have the same exact data. You're looking at the same data, but the y-axis is different. So you're looking at interest rates. And we know when we're talking about interest rates, tenths of a point matter, right? So the first graph is actually a better representation of how interest rates rose between 2008 and 2012 than the second graph, when all of the y-axes jumped by a whole half of a percent. And then that last one is average female height by country. Can anybody tell me what's wrong with this one? I mean, besides the fact that they're very strangely shaped. No one wants to chime in? Okay, at what age? I think this would be adults. Let's just go with it that they're adults.
I'm not on this chart.
That's right. Sylvia's not on the chart. So you have a y-axis that is going from 5 feet to 5'7". But what are we typically looking at? If we're looking at another human, what are we looking at when we're looking at their 5 feet to 5'7" range, right? We're looking at their face, right? We're not looking at their whole body. And in this chart, we're cramming in their whole body within 5 inches. And that's what ends up creating this weird distortion, right? So down in India, you're sticking a whole person within a single inch. And that's what creates this bizarre distortion. So those are just some examples of like just bad visualization. And I always like to end with some bad visualization because they're just kind of funny. And if you look at them, it seems, oh, like this is obvious, like this is not good. But sometimes you don't necessarily see it. Like Sylvia gave an own example of her own accident of just flipping the axes backwards. So it can be something simple. And that's why like Sylvia tried to drive home, having somebody else look at your work, and it can make a huge difference. I think that's all I had. Yeah. Do you have any questions for us? I guess would be the next.
And if no questions, we'd also be interested in knowing, you know, how have you been using data in your library, or how would you like to be using data in your library?
By a group.
I know it's like, it's post-lunch. I know I'm functionally useless in the afternoon.
So something that we get asked a lot at support is kind of what pieces of information are other libraries sharing with their library board or various stakeholders throughout their community. And you know, I can give vague answers, but it would be interesting to see, you know, what pieces of, you know, Spark data are people getting. Like, are you just reporting out circ, or are you just reporting out the number of items you added or deleted and things like that? It would be interesting to hear.
I have a scenario where I use data to create a story. At the Easton Area Public Library, we had some issues with mobile hotspots, and you know, the problem with them coming back late, and then we didn't have enough, and we had a long wait list. So we were trying to figure out how long it was taking people to pick up their hotspots after we placed them on hold. And so we went through and ran the data. I don't remember exactly how we got those numbers, but we went through all of our holds that we had trapped to see when they picked it up. And we found that even though we were giving them a 5-day window, that majority of people were picking it up in the first or second day. So we felt that with that data, we went to the administration and asked if we could shorten the time that we would hold a hotspot to 3 days, showing them that 95% of the people are picking it up within 2 days. So we made a modification to the amount of time that we were holding them. And the data that we presented was the breaking point to get them to agree.
That's a great example. I love that. Because then it also, when you inevitably have that one person that's like upset that you're not holding it for 5 days, you're like, well, you know, we did a very close look at the data. So, yeah, but I think that's a great use. Thank you for sharing.
I create each month for my board, I call it a usage report. So it has a sheet where half of it shows the circulations, the number of circulations for each location in the library. And I include in there ebook and e-audio checkouts, as well as the number of items we borrowed through interlibrary loan that month and loaned out. And then on the flip side, from materials being used, I also include program attendance at all of our programs, a number of programs we had, library visits with our door counter, new library cards made, the total number of library cards at the end of the month. And we do passports now, so I include the number of passports that we did that month. I love numbers, so I'll always want to collect numbers, but I have to stop myself sometimes and remind myself, is this number gonna be used somewhere? If it is, I can use it in a story, or I have to have this for the annual report. Let me definitely include it and consolidate it all into one place. Basically, I've asked my board what do they want to see, and they said they're okay with what I give them. So I think it's always good to check with whoever you're, presenting this to and make sure it is appealing to them. I was at a county commissioner meeting last week, and I paired some of this with the computer usage, and we have a law library computer here, just because I'm talking to elected officials and they want to see how their residents are benefiting from the library. And talking about DVD rentals, might not be the right topic for them.
That's a great example of, taking the data that you've collected and putting it into different context for different groups. So good job with that. That's awesome. And I also collect a lot of numbers, and I get really excited about them and then get really ahead of myself. So I understand.
When you're building a data story, it can also be really helpful to have some sort of a benchmark or some sort of number to compare what you're doing to. Because a set of numbers alone, I'm going to pick on Vince for a second. He creates these sheets with all of these different stats on them, but without any sort of comparison group or anything like that, they don't necessarily mean anything without the extra context. So sometimes using that to show year-over-year changes in circulation, then you're benchmarking yourself against yourself, which is fine. That's a form of benchmarking. Or if you had, within Spark, these, if you could compare, I'm not sure how it functions, but if you could compare yourselves to other libraries, you could also be benchmarking yourself against other libraries. Maybe you have an aspirational library that you would like to have more things like, and you could compare yourself to that library to see how you're doing by comparison. Sylvia and I are working on another project, a collection audit, and we wanted to compare our data to representational data that exists within children's literature about authorship and diversity within authorship. So we were able to find that data set so we can compare our data to the data that already exists. So having that comparison can really also build that context and help you build that story. Yes, thank you, Elizabeth.
You can also, benchmark against other libraries in Spark, but this is a tool that you could use also to benchmark across the country.
Yeah, that's excellent.
And we had one last slide that just had some additional resources for anyone who is interested. And I think, Elizabeth, I can share these slides with you if anyone wants them.
Definitely. We have a whole page for data stuff and using reports data. So I will add it to that page.
The other thing that I'll put a plug in for benchmarking wise is, I know we all love collecting all our annual report data. but it does actually go somewhere. So it gets aggregated by the Office of Commonwealth Libraries, and they have some of it available on their site. And then all libraries in the US who participate in the Public Library Survey, it all gets vacuumed up to the IMLS page. So while it is very hard to compare apples to apples benchmarking wise with a, you know, like a library in Texas that has a completely different funding structure, it is cool to just kind of, you know, click around. And then if there are particular libraries that you want to benchmark with, then you can pull their data. So I always enjoy
It's very cool.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I guess just thank you so much for having us. This was very nice to be able to share this information with you and hear a little bit about what you all are doing at your libraries. I always get very excited to talk about data.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys really doing this for us. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I didn't get to attend at PALA, but I heard about it, and they're like,
Oh.
"Oh, we have to get them to do it for us." So we appreciate it.
It was my only memory of it is it was like a little horrifying because we were on a little stage and I'm like, I'm gonna fall off this stage. So
Trip hazard.
We managed not to fall off. So
we
that's
did.
good.
That was good.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you again. And I guess we will drop off and let you get on with the rest of your meeting. So enjoy. And thank you again for having us.
thank you.
Guys.
Thanks
Bye,
again.
everyone.
Thank you.
I will go back to sharing my screen just to bring up the agenda again, which next we have on the agenda just going over the reports, frequently asked questions site on the Spark support portal. And hopefully, you know what, I think I saw Elizabeth already at it. Yes. Let me see if I can take me there. Perfect. Nope, that wasn't it.
Let me get you.
I
That
have
was
it here
the
too.
page we have for all of our data, like tools.
There
that
we
you
go.
could- There you go.
There we go. All right. So did I click the wrong one or was it in there?
No, you're on the right page.
Okay. There it is. Okay, so just a few general reminders of when running reports. Here's a page that will let you know some tidbits, which I think some of these were on. There was one question in the trivia question for this week's giveaway. You guys haven't done that yet, but just quick reminders that, like, first one, Evergreen Reporter can run the 2 reports at the same time, but only one report. I know sometimes, you know, when I'm running reports, sometimes ones that will take just a minute or two may take a little bit longer, but still I try to make sure I don't go at least past 2 at the most. So I try to stick to the one. Sometimes I'll push it to 2, but like I said, normally they are the, you know, quick running reports. But yeah, just stick to the 1 report at a time, just so it doesn't clog up everything. Because if someone's running a large report during the day, then it backs everybody else up. Correct? Am I correct in that, Elizabeth and Katie? And
Yeah, so
yeah.
if you queue up like 5 weeding reports for 5 different sections of your library, depending on the elements that you have in your report, it may take a little bit longer to run. And if you're running 5 or 6, it could kind of cause what I like to call a log jam. I don't know if that's a technical term, but it causes a little bit of a jam in the system. And so we have to wait for all of the reports to either finish or time out and fail. And that does prevent other people from running those quicker reports. So if you can run those overnight, you can schedule them, you know, after hours, or even just on off-peak times. So, you know, after 5, that would be greatly appreciated.
And then the next one is just the reports will run for 2 hours before timing out. So let's see, reach out to Spark Support if it times out. And the next one I didn't know, that they only remain on the server for 60 days, and you have to rerun the report after that. So I have some cleaning up to do for all of my output folders.
It'll still list the outputs, but when you click the link, it won't go anywhere. So you can keep them in there. You don't have to delete it. Just on the back end, the output disappears.
And I'm assuming it was a decision that was made before my time, but I'm assuming it was a storage size issue, because we had been keeping, like, if you had a report you ran 5 years ago, you could go back in and see it. And so I think it was just an incredible amount of data.
Yeah, it was a lot of reports that were being retained.
Yeah.
And 60 days at most tends to be a sufficient amount of time. If you do need the reports, or you fear you may need the reports at a future date, just download the Excel file and save it locally, and then you'll be able to have that data.
That's what, just a tidbit of what I do. That's what I do for my monthlies. I have, like, each year, create my little folder for the stats and break it down by CERC numbers and new patron count and all that. I just save all that Excel data, you know, and then it's easy to refer back to. So that's why I guess I didn't know about the 60-day.
Yeah, you never ran into it.
Never ran into it. All right, moving on then. Also, if you do run a report and you want to get the notification when the report is done, you will get the email from the PAILs at email address you see there. So it may be a good idea to add it to your email whitelist in case it's not coming into your inbox. And also, if you haven't already signed up for the reports listserv, be sure you do. And there's the link for that under number 5. All right. Anything else anyone would like to add while we're on the FAQs?
Or anything people would like me to add to the FAQ, which to make it easier for folks.
No? Okay, well then moving on to the next agenda item. So just looking to have a discussion to see what the group would like to see for future meetings. My ideas are doing a simple reporter training, a refresher on that, and also running another separate training for running the traditional reporter as well, running reports on that. So are those topics that everyone would be interested in seeing again, refresher courses on those? And if you have other ideas, please throw them in the chat or feel free to share. Also look for more presenters, topics that we had Sylvia and Kate, and our previous meeting, we had a presentation as well. So just trying to gauge what the group would like to see. If no thoughts right now, you could always feel free to throw it into the listserv or contact myself directly, or anyone at Spark Support, Elizabeth, Katie, and Kat. I'm sure they would love to hear about it as well. But you could direct it to the listserv or to myself directly, and I can go from there. So, all right, and then lastly, if anyone has just any general questions or issues or comments about Spark Reports, any troubles or successes you'd like to share?
Hello. I was wondering at a future meeting if we might talk about different ways of organizing reports.
Do you mean in turn, just so for clarification, like
in folders, like
in folders? Okay.
Yes. Like types of reports and how they could be grouped. And I have probably thousands of reports, and in about a year and a half, I'm looking to retire, so I'd like to try to get that cleaned up.
Okay, thanks. That's a great idea. I like that.
And we've slowly been chipping away at some of the older template folders and things like that, and making sure that the older things aren't still, you know, running, that aren't going anywhere. So that will dovetail nicely in with, you know, we could look at the individual user side of how to organize your stuff, so you can find it, which I know I struggle with sometimes in my own reports folders. And then the other part would be feedback for us about maybe some, you know, some of the shared reports, and how we could make sure that those are accessible so that you can find them when you want them, but that the list isn't too overwhelming, because I know that it is right now. So I think that could be a benefit to us as well, to have some other eyes looking at that.
I agree with this. I have such a problem sometimes. I just use the search tool. If I'm looking for something that's patron driven, I just go in there and type in patron, just to see only the ones with patrons. Even though I have a good filing system, there's just too many.
Yeah. And some of us will remember the dark times before you could search the templates. So at least we have that.
Can I also bring something else up? I just recently signed the patron data and privacy policy. And in there, it talks about assigning library staff permission to run reports. Is there a rollout date for that, or what's happening there?
Yes, I think, but you know, I want to let Elizabeth talk about it rather than go ahead.
So yes, we will be rolling that out. We wanted to make sure that everyone has signed the patron privacy and data policy. We have a few remaining folks that we need to get in touch with, and then we will roll out the cleanup. And then after that is all done, we will roll out the waiver, which will be a privacy waiver, just acknowledging that you as a staff member have read the privacy policy, and we will assign the report's permissions. What we'll do is we'll give everyone a date. I believe we have it in June.
Over
Let me check
this,
my notes.
yeah, to try to have it started at least over the summer.
Yeah, we have it in, we're setting it up for June, and then we'll give you a few months to sign the waiver, acknowledging that you did read the privacy policy as an individual. And then we will update your account, just kind of like we did with the cataloging permissions. And then we'll put a little note in your account that said that you signed it. And then we will remove the reporter permissions from the main groups that they are now in. So it's kind of a multi-step phase project.
And we wanted to make sure that we didn't create any additional heartburn around annual report time, which is the reason that we haven't started the rollout yet, is that we wanted to make sure that while it will be a few months, you know, several months before we'd actually be taking permissions away, we didn't want anybody to be concerned about it during annual report time. And so we're gonna try to do that in between annual reports and have it done well before the start of the cycle next year.
And are you going to send that information to your Spark contacts, or how are you sending that out?
It'll probably go to everybody. We haven't.
I was going to say, there are very few people in our organization that run reports. Very few.
Right. And you would probably want to choose who you wouldn't want people to just sign up for the permission to sign up for it. So
correct.
yeah, so we still have some figuring out to do because each library is a little bit different structure wise. So, yeah, we're gonna have to figure that one out. But that's good feedback.
Okay, thank you.
We were actually mentioning it at the big meeting for when everybody meets next week. So thank you for asking though.
Yeah. So yeah, so that'll be the first like public announcement. It's in, obviously the privacy policy has been publicly announced. But that's one of the provisions that hasn't come into force yet. So we'll be debuting it.
A little more time for any other questions or comments.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion, Terry, is ask the directors to designate
Sure.
who they want and then use that to then send people the form. That could work.
Okay, well, we are coming up on the hour, and if no one else has anything, then I just want to thank everyone again for attending today. And I will be in touch with our next meeting, which will be sometime in June, I believe, but I will send another email out to the listserv for a reminder. So thank you again, everyone, for attending. Have a great day.